The great council chamber stretched out like a vast metal cathedral. Hundreds of different alien species sat in their assigned seats, their strange forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had scales that shimmered like jewels. A few looked almost like giant insects with multiple eyes that never seemed to blink. Ambassador Hyunwoo walked into the chamber with calm, measured steps. His black diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed. Not a single wrinkle could be seen anywhere. Behind him walked two other humans. So Young carried a small briefcase and wore the simple gray uniform of a military liaison. Jae-min had several, thick folders under his arm, and the patient look of someone who spent his days explaining human culture to confused aliens. The humans looked so ordinary compared to everyone else in the room. They had no extra arms, no glowing eyes, no impressive size. They were just three people in neat clothes who smiled politely at everyone they passed. "The council recognizes the human delegation," announced Councilor Vextar. The tall, blue-skinned being had been running these meetings for over 50 years. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder in a cave. "Please state your business today." Hyunwoo bowed his head slightly. It was a small gesture of respect that he had practiced thousands of times. "Thank you, honored counselor. We are here regarding the territorial dispute with the Vorthak Empire. 3 of our colony worlds are being claimed under what they call the Cultural Superiority Clause." A ripple of quiet conversation went through the chamber. The Cultural Superiority Clause was old law, written back when the galaxy was much younger and much more violent. Most species had forgotten it even existed. The humans dare to question ancient law. The voice came from the Vorthak section. Kralthos stood up slowly. He was massive, even by Vorthak standards. His red skin looked like it had been carved from stone, and his 4 arms ended in claws that could tear through metal. 2 smaller Vorthak flanked him, their yellow eyes fixed on the human delegation. "We question nothing," honored Kralthos, Hyunwoo replied. His voice was soft and respectful. "We simply wish to present evidence that our colonies were established before any Vorthak presence in those systems." This brought laughter from several parts of the chamber. The idea that humans, who had only joined the galactic community 30 years ago, could have older claims than the mighty Vorthak Empire seemed impossible. Tae-ho stepped forward. He was the representative of the 3 disputed colonies. His face was weathered from years of hard work under alien suns, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence. In his hands was a data pad that contained the hopes of 3 million human colonists. "If I may present our evidence," Tae-ho said. He activated the data pad, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed 3 star systems in perfect detail. Each planet was marked with dates and settlement information. New Busan was settled in 2387, Tae-ho explained. New Seoul followed in 2389. New Daegu was established in 2391. All 3 colonies have been continuously inhabited by humans for over 40 years. Kralthos let out a sound that might have been laughter if it had come from something less terrifying. "Human lies. The Vorthak Empire has ancient claims to those worlds, claims that go back centuries." Respectfully, Hyunwoo said, his smile never wavering. "We would be very interested to see documentation of these ancient claims. Our records show no Vorthak presence in those systems until 2425. The chamber fell quiet. Everyone knew that challenging a Vorthak claim was dangerous. The Vorthak Empire was one of the oldest and most powerful forces in the galaxy. They had destroyed entire species for less than what the humans were suggesting. But Hyunwoo continued to smile that same polite smile. Kralthos's 4 hands curled into fists. You dare suggest that the mighty Vorthak Empire would lie about its territorial claims? Not at all, Hyunwoo replied. We simply believe there may be some confusion in the records. Perhaps if we could compare our documentation with yours, we could resolve this matter quickly and peacefully. So, Young opened her briefcase and pulled out a small device. She set it on the table in front of her and pressed a button. Another holographic display appeared, this one showing detailed maps, settlement records, and even video footage of human families arriving on the 3 worlds. The evidence was overwhelming. The humans had clearly been there first. Their colonies were well established and thriving. The documentation was perfect, organized with the kind of careful attention to detail that humans were famous for. Around the chamber, various alien council members whispered to each other. The Zelthran delegation buzzed with electronic sounds that served as their language. The insect-like Hithrak clicked their mandibles in what might have been approval. This evidence seems quite thorough, said Counselor Vextar. Kralthos, do you have documentation to support your claims? Kralthos looked angry enough to tear the chamber apart with his bare hands. But this was neutral ground, protected by ancient treaties. Even the Vorthak had to follow the rules here. The Vorthak Empire does not need to justify its claims to lesser species, he growled. Our right to those worlds comes from our superior culture and our proven ability to use them properly. Jaemin stepped forward now. As the cultural attaché, it was his job to handle exactly this kind of situation. With great respect, honored Kralthos, the Cultural Superiority Clause requires specific documentation. It cannot simply be claimed without proof. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Very few species knew the ancient laws well enough to quote them accurately. The humans had clearly done their homework. Kralthos's yellow eyes narrowed to thin slits. The humans think they understand our laws better than we do? We have studied your laws very carefully, Hyunwoo said. We believe in following proper procedures. It is the polite thing to do. That word, polite, seemed to hang in the air. To most of the council members, it perfectly described humanity. They were the polite species, always following rules, always asking permission, always saying please and thank you. They were useful to have around because they were good at organizing things and fixing problems. But they were not dangerous. They were not a threat to anyone. Counselor Vextar looked at the evidence displays floating in the chamber. The human documentation appears to be in order. Kralthos, you have 3 standard days to present your own evidence supporting the Vorthak claims. Kralthos's expression grew even darker. This is not over, humans. The Vorthak Empire will not be embarrassed by a species of soft-skinned weaklings. Hyunwoo bowed again, just as politely as before. Of course, honored Kralthos. We look forward to reviewing your evidence. We are always happy to learn more about Vorthak history and culture. As the session ended and the various delegations began to file out, So Young quietly packed away the holographic display. Her movements were efficient and practiced. Nothing about her suggested that she was anything more than a helpful assistant. But if anyone had been watching carefully, they might have noticed that her eyes never stopped moving. She cataloged every exit, every security camera, every potential threat in the chamber. It was the kind of awareness that came from years of training that had nothing to do with diplomacy. The humans left the council chamber with the same polite smiles they had worn when they entered. To everyone watching, they looked like exactly what they claimed to be, a peaceful species that believed in following the rules and being nice to everyone. Nobody suspected that they might be anything else. 3 days passed quickly in the neutral station that housed the Galactic Council. During this time, the human delegation waited patiently in their assigned quarters. They attended the scheduled cultural exchange dinners. They participated in the morning meditation sessions that the Zelthran delegation hosted. They were, as always, perfectly polite guests. Yunwu spent his mornings reviewing legal documents and his afternoons meeting with other council members. He answered their questions about human culture with endless patience. He explained human holidays, human food, and human customs to anyone who asked. He never seemed tired of being helpful. So Young attended the mandatory security briefings that all military liaisons had to sit through. She listened to the station commander explain the rules about weapons and defensive systems. She nodded at all the right times and asked reasonable questions about emergency procedures. She looked like every other bureaucrat in the galaxy. Jae-min worked with the translation systems, making sure that human language was properly understood by all the different species. It was detailed, boring work that required careful attention to small differences in meaning. He approached it with the same careful precision that humans brought to everything they did. On the 4th day, Kralthos returned to the council chamber. The Vorthak delegation had grown larger. Where before there had been only 3 of them, now there were 12. They wore the dark armor of Vorthak military officers, and their weapons were clearly visible despite council regulations. The message was obvious. The Vorthak Empire was not happy. Honored Council, Kralthos began, his voice filling the chamber like the rumble of distant thunder. The Vorthak Empire has prepared our response to the human claims. Hyun Woo sat in his assigned seat, hands folded in his lap. His expression was attentive and interested, like a student waiting to learn something new. Beside him, So Young held her datapad ready to take notes. Jae-min had his translation equipment active in case there were any language difficulties. They looked completely relaxed. The humans claim that their settlements are older than our rightful claims, Kralthos continued, but they fail to understand the true meaning of territorial rights. The Vorthak Empire does not simply claim empty worlds. We claim worlds that serve the greater good of galactic civilization. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed the 3 disputed worlds, but the images were different from what the humans had presented. These showed Vorthak ships in orbit, Vorthak structures on the surface, and Vorthak flags planted in alien soil. These worlds are now properly administered by the Vorthak Empire, Kralthos announced. The previous inhabitants have been relocated to areas where they can contribute more effectively to galactic society. The images changed. Now they showed human colonists being loaded onto transport ships. The humans in the hologram looked scared and confused. Children cried as they were separated from their parents. Adults were pushed into groups and marched toward the ships by Vorthak soldiers. Taeho half rose from his seat, but Hyunwoo placed a gentle hand on his arm and shook his head slightly. Taeho sat back down, but his jaw was tight with anger. Humans who previously lived on these worlds are being given the opportunity to serve the Empire in ways that better match their abilities, Kralthos explained. They will work in our mining operations, our manufacturing centers, and our agricultural facilities. It is a much better use of their limited talents. The holographic display zoomed in on one particular scene. A young human woman was holding two small children, maybe 4 and 6 years old. She was crying as Vorthak soldiers reached for her children. The audio was clear enough to hear her voice as she begged them not to separate her family. "Please," the woman said in the recording, "they're just babies. Please don't take them away from me." The camera showed her name and identification: Minji Park, resident of New Busan, mother of 2. The Vorthak soldier in the recording pushed the woman away and picked up both children. The last image showed Minji on her knees, reaching toward her children as they were carried away. The chamber was completely silent. Hyunwoo's hands were still folded in his lap, but his knuckles had gone white. His polite smile had not changed, but something in his eyes had shifted. It was a small change, barely noticeable, but it was there. So Young's hand moved to the small communication device on her wrist. Her fingers traced over its surface in a pattern that looked like nervous fidgeting. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like she was anxious. But the device registered her touch patterns and began sending coded signals to receivers far beyond the council station. "The Vorthak Empire has acted within its rights," Kralthos continued. "These worlds are now productive members of our domain. The humans have been given meaningful work to do. Everyone benefits from proper Vorthak administration." Jamin's translation equipment registered the words and checked them against human language databases. The words relocated, contribute, and meaningful work were flagged in his system. In human databases, these were known as euphemisms. The real words were kidnapped, enslaved, and forced labor. The human delegation may present any objections they wish, Kralthos added, with what might have been amusement. But the matter is settled. The Vorthak Empire has spoken. Hyunwoo stood up slowly. His movement was controlled and precise. When he spoke, his voice was still perfectly calm and respectful. "Honored Kralthos, the human delegation requests a brief recess to discuss this new information." Councillor Vextar looked surprised. Usually when species were presented with Vorthak military action, they either submitted immediately or began making angry threats. The humans were doing neither. "Of course," Vextar said. "The council will recess for 1 standard hour." As the various delegations began to file out of the chamber, Hyunwoo walked toward the exit with the same measured pace he had used when entering. But those who knew how to look could see the difference. His shoulders were slightly more square. His stride was slightly more purposeful. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging faces and positions. So Young followed behind him, still looking like nothing more than a helpful assistant. But her hand remained on her communication device, and her fingers continued their pattern of signals. Jae-min gathered his equipment with his usual careful attention to detail. But as he worked, he activated several additional communication channels that had nothing to do with translation services. In the hallway outside the council chamber, other delegations whispered among themselves. The Zelthron buzzed with electronic concern. The Hithrak clicked with what sounded like approval of Vorthak efficiency. The smaller species huddled together and spoke in worried tones about what this might mean for their own territorial disputes. But everyone agreed on one thing. The humans had been completely outmaneuvered. The Vorthak had taken their colonies and enslaved their people, and there was nothing the polite little humans could do about it. The humans walked to their assigned conference room without speaking to anyone. They moved with the same courteous efficiency that had characterized all their interactions with the galactic community. They still looked like diplomats who believed that problems could be solved with paperwork and proper procedures. But in the secure conference room, with the sound dampeners activated and the electronic shields in place, Hyun-woo spoke a single sentence in Korean, Jongjungham Modeo Haeje, politeness mode disable. So-young looked at her communication device. Confirmation signals were already coming back from locations throughout the galaxy. Green lights appeared on her screen one by one as distant receivers acknowledged her coded messages. Jaemin activated his real communication equipment. Not the translation gear he carried in public, but the military-grade systems that could reach Earth Command through quantum entanglement channels that ignored the normal limitations of space and time. Within minutes, alarms were sounding in command. Centers on Earth, on Luna, on Mars, and on every human military station scattered throughout their territory. The message was simple and clear. Protocol 7 was ended. The humans were no longer being polite, but in the council chamber, as the recess ended and the delegations returned to their seats, the humans still looked exactly the same. Hyun-woo still smiled his diplomatic smile. So-young still carried her simple briefcase. Jaemin still looked like a patient cultural exchange specialist. Nobody in the chamber suspected that anything had changed. The humans were still the same, polite, harmless species they had always been. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The secure conference room was smaller than the Grand Council chamber, but it felt much more dangerous. The walls were lined with technology that could block any form of electronic surveillance. The air recycling system created a gentle hum that would mask any conversation from outside listeners. This was where the real business of galactic politics happened, away from the public ceremonies and formal speeches. Da-yoon sat at the conference table with files spread out in front of her. She had been introduced to other delegations as a junior researcher, someone who helped with background information and historical data. Her thick glasses and quiet manner made her seem harmless, like a librarian who had wandered into the wrong building. But the files in front of her contained information that would terrify anyone who understood what they were reading. Confirmed casualties on New Busan, 47 dead, over 2,000 missing, Da-eun reported in a voice that never changed tone. The missing include 312 children under the age of 12. Hyun-woo listened without changing expression. His diplomatic training had taught him to control his reactions, but now that control served a different purpose. The polite mask he wore in public was becoming something else entirely. New Seoul, 61 dead, 1,500 missing. Da-yoon continued. Vorthak forces targeted the schools first. They separated families at loading points. Adults over 50 were classified as non-productive and left behind without food or medical supplies. So-young's communication device showed dozens of green lights now. Each light represented a military unit that had received her coded signals and confirmed their readiness status. Ships that had been running peaceful trade missions were now arming their weapons. Space stations that appeared to be research facilities were powering up defensive systems that officially did not exist. New. Daegu. 38 dead, over 3,000 missing, Da-eun said. Complete population of the northern continent has been removed. Vorthak mining equipment is already being moved into the area. Jaemin closed his translation equipment and opened a different case. Inside was communication gear that looked nothing like the simple devices he used for cultural exchange work. His fingers moved across controls that could reach every human settlement in the galaxy simultaneously. Earth Command is asking for confirmation of Protocol 7 suspension, he reported. Admiral Wanbin is requesting permission to address the council directly. Hyun-woo nodded once. It was a small movement, but it carried the weight of 30 years of human integration into galactic society. 30 years of being polite, helpful, and harmless. 30 years of carefully building relationships and earning trust. All of that was about to end. Tell the Admiral that Protocol 7 is suspended indefinitely, Hyun-woo said. Full authorization for direct council address. The recess period was ending. Through the walls of the conference room, they could hear the sound of hundreds of alien delegates returning to their seats. The formal session was about to resume, and everyone expected the humans to either submit to Vorthak demands or make some ineffective protest that would be ignored. Nobody expected what was actually going to happen. The human delegation returned to the council chamber exactly on time. They walked with the same measured pace, wore the same polite expressions, and took their assigned seats with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized all their interactions with the galactic community. Counselor, Vextar called the session to order. The human delegation may now present their response to the Vorthak territorial claims. Hyun-woo stood up slowly. For a moment, he looked exactly like the same diplomatic ambassador who had been attending these meetings for years. His uniform was perfectly pressed. His hands were folded respectfully. His expression was calm and attentive. But when he spoke, something was different. Honored Council, Hyun-woo began, the human delegation has reviewed the evidence presented by the Vorthak Empire. We have confirmed the accuracy of their claims regarding current occupation of the 3 disputed worlds. A murmur of surprise went through the chamber. Everyone had expected the humans to deny the Vorthak claims or demand some kind of investigation. Instead, they seemed to be accepting defeat. We have also confirmed the accuracy of their statements regarding the relocation of human colonists, Hyun-woo continued. Our intelligence services have verified that over 6,000 human citizens, including more than 400 children, have been removed from their homes and transported to Vorthak labor facilities. Kralthos leaned back in his seat with what might have been satisfaction. The humans were acknowledging Vorthak's superiority in front of the entire galactic community. It was exactly the kind of humiliation he had hoped to achieve. Therefore, Hyun-woo said, his voice still perfectly calm, the human delegation makes the following request of the Vorthak Empire. He paused, and in that pause, something changed in his eyes. The polite diplomat was still there, but something else was looking out from behind his gaze. Something that had been hidden for 30 years of careful diplomacy. We kindly request immediate Vorthak withdrawal from all 3 worlds, Hyun-woo said. We kindly request the immediate return of all human citizens currently held in Vorthak facilities. We kindly request full reparations for damages caused to human property and human lives. The chamber erupted in surprised conversation. The humans were making demands of the Vorthak Empire. It was so unexpected that many delegates thought they had misunderstood the translation. Hyun-woo raised his hand, and the chamber gradually fell. Quiet. This is our last polite request, he added. Kralthos stood up so quickly that his chair fell over backward. His 4 arms spread wide, and his claws extended to their full length. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough to rattle the walls. The humans dare to make demands of the Vorthak Empire, he roared. You pathetic little creatures think you can threaten us. We could crush your entire species without effort. Other Vorthak delegates stood up as well. They moved into threatening positions, their weapons clearly visible despite council regulations. The message was clear. The humans should be afraid. But Hyun Woo just stood there with the same calm expression. He did not step backward. He did not raise his voice. He did not show any sign of fear. "We are not threatening anyone," he said quietly. "We are making a request. A polite request for the return of our people and our property." The laughter that followed came from multiple species throughout the chamber. The idea that the humans could make demands of anyone, much less the mighty Vorthak Empire, seemed ridiculous to most of the galactic community. The Zelthron delegate buzzed with electronic sounds that translated as amused disbelief. The Hithrak clicked their mandibles in what was clearly their version of laughter. Even some of the smaller, weaker species seemed to find the human request entertaining. Perhaps the human delegation should consider more realistic negotiations, suggested Counselor Vexitar. His tone was not unkind, but it carried the clear implication that the humans were being unreasonable. So Young quietly activated something on her wrist device. To anyone watching, it looked like she was checking the time or perhaps taking notes on her schedule. But the device sent out a signal that reached far beyond the council station. Throughout the galaxy, human commanders received a simple, coded message: Amber Light. It meant that diplomatic solutions had been attempted and rejected. It meant that peaceful negotiation was no longer possible. It meant that Protocol 7 was not only suspended, but that its replacement was now active. On Earth, Admiral Wanbin looked at the message on his command screen and activated communication systems that had been built for exactly this situation. His image appeared on screens throughout human space, from the smallest research station to the largest military facility. "All units, this is Earth Command," Wanbin said. "Implement Protocol 8. Authorization, final courtesy." Protocol 8 was something that no alien species knew existed. It was the protocol that governed human military action when diplomacy had completely failed, when politeness had been rejected and kindness had been ignored, when humanity stopped pretending to be harmless. But in the council chamber, none of this was visible. Hyun-Woo still stood in his place, still wore his diplomatic expression, still spoke in the same calm, respectful tone. "We understand that our request may seem unreasonable," he said to the assembled delegates. "We understand that the Vorthak Empire is ancient and powerful. We understand that humanity is young and small compared to the great civilizations represented in this chamber." He paused again, and this time his slight smile seemed different. It was still polite, but there was something else in it now. Something that had not been there before. "But we hope the Council will understand that we cannot simply abandon our people. We hope you will understand that some things are more important to us than galactic politics or territorial disputes." Kralthos laughed again, a sound like grinding stone. What could a species of weak little creatures possibly do against the might of the Vorthak Empire? Will you fill out complaint forms? Will you write angry letters? The laughter that followed was even louder than before. The humans had always been known for their paperwork and their procedures. The council chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence after Kralthos's laughter died away. Most of the delegates were still processing what they had just witnessed. The humans had made demands of the Vorthak Empire, been laughed at, and then calmly stated that they hoped it would not come to something other than paperwork and procedures. But what else could it come to? Everyone knew that humans were peaceful. They had never fought a war against any galactic species. They had never even threatened military action. In 30 years of membership in the galactic community, they had been model citizens who followed. every rule and respected every treaty. Hyun-woo remained standing, his hands still folded respectfully in front of him. He looked like he was waiting for something, though no one could guess what that might be. The answer came in the form of a soft chime from the council chamber's communication system. Incoming priority transmission for the Galactic Council, announced the automated system. Source: Earth Command, Human Territorial Authority. Classification: Official Diplomatic Communication. Counselor Vextar looked puzzled. The humans had never sent direct transmissions to the Council before. All their communications had always gone through their delegation, following proper diplomatic channels. "Does the human delegation wish to present this communication?" Vextar asked. Hyun-woo shook his head slightly. "This communication is not from our delegation, honored counselor. It is from our military command structure. We believe it would be appropriate for the council to receive it directly." A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, larger than any that had been used during the proceedings. The image was crystal clear, showing a human in a uniform that no one in the chamber had ever seen before. The uniform was dark blue, almost black, with silver insignia that seemed to shift and move in the light. The man wearing it was middle-aged, with gray hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His posture was perfect, the kind of bearing that came from decades of command responsibility. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," the man said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber despite the holographic transmission. "I am Admiral Wonbin, Chief of Naval Operations for the Human Territorial Defense Force." Several delegates exchanged glances. The humans had a defense force? This was the first time anyone had heard of such an organization. "I apologize for interrupting your proceedings," Wonbin continued, "but recent events require clarification of certain aspects of human participation in galactic society." Kralthos leaned forward in his seat. "What is this? Some kind of human theater? Some attempt to intimidate the Vorthak Empire with pretend military forces?" Wonbin's expression did not change, but his eyes shifted to focus directly on the Vorthak delegation. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to make the air itself feel heavier. "Ambassador Hyun-woo and his delegation have been operating under Protocol 7 of the Human Diplomatic Charter," Wonbin said. "Protocol 7 requires maximum diplomatic courtesy in all interactions with galactic species. It requires exhaustive attempts at peaceful resolution before any other options are considered." The chamber was completely quiet now. Every delegate was listening with full attention, though most of them still had no idea what they were hearing. "As of 37 minutes ago," Wonbin continued, "Protocol 7 was suspended by order of the Human Defense Council. Ambassador, Hyun-woo is no longer required to maintain maximum diplomatic courtesy." Hyun-woo's expression had not changed, but somehow he looked different. The polite diplomat was still there, but something else was becoming visible beneath the surface. "I do not understand the significance of this announcement," said Counselor Vextar. "Surely diplomatic courtesy is simply part of civilized interaction?" Wonbin's slight smile was nothing like the diplomatic expressions the council members were used to seeing from humans. It was colder, sharper, and somehow much more dangerous. "That is a common misconception, honored counselor. What you have experienced as human nature for the past 30 years has actually been our diplomatic personnel operating under strict behavioral protocols. You have never seen us behave naturally." A ripple of confusion went through the chamber. The idea that human politeness was artificial, that it was something they had to work at rather than something that came naturally, was difficult for most species to understand. What you have observed, Wanbin continued, is our species being deliberately, consciously, and sometimes painfully polite. You have interacted with humans who were under orders to be nice to you, regardless of how you treated them in return. Kralthos stood up again, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture of dismissal. This is meaningless human nonsense. What changes now? Will you file complaints in triplicate instead of duplicate? Will you use stronger language in your diplomatic notes? Wanbin looked directly at the Vorthak delegation for several long seconds before he answered. What changes now, he said quietly, is that you are about to meet the species that conquered its own deathworld. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Every delegate in the chamber tried to process what they had just heard. The humans came from Earth, which was classified as a Class M world suitable for carbon-based life. It was not particularly dangerous compared to many homeworlds in the galaxy. But Wanbin continued speaking, and his words painted a very different picture. Earth is a world where the dominant predators hunt in coordinated packs, where the weather systems can destroy entire continents, where the geology regularly reshapes the surface without warning, where the native diseases can kill most galactic species within hours. He paused, letting that information settle into the minds of his audience. The species that evolved on Earth did not become the dominant life form by being polite. We became dominant by being more dangerous than everything else on a world that tried to kill us every single day. So Young's communication device showed more green lights than ever before. Signals were coming in from locations that most council members did not even know existed. Human presence in the galaxy was apparently much more extensive than anyone had realized. But we chose to be polite, Wanbin continued. When we encountered galactic civilization, we made a conscious decision to suppress our natural behavior patterns. We chose to be diplomatic instead of territorial. We chose to be helpful instead of competitive. We chose to be peaceful instead of predatory. Jamin activated another piece of equipment, and new holographic displays appeared around the chamber. They showed star charts with human settlements marked in blue. But there were far more blue dots than anyone had expected. The humans had been much busier during their 30 years in galactic society than anyone had realized. The choice to be polite was exactly that, Wanbin said. A choice, not a limitation, not an inability to be anything else. A conscious decision to behave in a way that would make other species comfortable around us. Counselor Vextar leaned forward in his chair. Are you suggesting that human diplomatic behavior has been artificial? Not artificial, Wanbin replied. Controlled, managed, deliberately restrained. We have been very, very careful not to behave in ways that might alarm our galactic neighbors. The chamber erupted in whispered conversations as delegates tried to understand what they were hearing. The humans had been pretending to be harmless. They had been hiding their true nature for 3 decades. Kralthos's voice cut through the murmur like a blade. Enough of this foolishness. What exactly are you threatening us with? What could a species of soft little creatures possibly do to the mighty Vorthak Empire? Wanbin's expression grew completely serious. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in battles that most species could not even imagine. We are not threatening anyone, he said. Threats are what you make when you want someone to be afraid of, what you might do. We are simply informing you of what we are going to do. Another pause, and in that pause, the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. 6,000 human citizens have been taken from their homes. 412 of them are children. They are being held in forced labor facilities against their will. Wanbin's image leaned forward slightly, and suddenly he looked less like a diplomat and more like something that had crawled out of humanity's violent evolutionary past. We are going to get them back. The simple statement carried more menace than all of Kralthos's roaring and posturing. It was not a threat or a demand. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided what was going to happen. And when we are finished, Wanbin added, you will understand the difference between a species that chooses to be polite and a species that is incapable of being dangerous. The holographic transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in complete silence. Hyun-woo was still standing in his place, still wearing the same diplomatic expression. But now everyone in the chamber was looking at him with new eyes. The polite ambassador was still there, but now they could see something else lurking beneath the surface, something that had been waiting patiently for 30 years to be unleashed. The silence that followed Admiral Wanbin's transmission lasted exactly 17 seconds. It was broken by the sound of Kralthos laughing, a harsh noise that echoed through the chamber like breaking stone. Empty threats from soft creatures, he declared, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dismissal. The Vorthak Empire has faced real warriors, not diplomatic clerks with delusions of military power. But his laughter died away when another chime sounded from the council chambers. Communication system. Priority alert, the automated system announced. Multiple unscheduled transmissions incoming from Vorthak territorial space. Kralthos frowned. The Vorthak military never sent transmissions during council sessions unless there was an emergency. His yellow eyes narrowed as he activated his personal communication device. The holographic display that appeared above his device showed a Vorthak military commander in full battle armor. But something was wrong with the image. The commander's face was filled with confusion and what might have been fear. General Kralthos, the commander said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. We have a situation, multiple situations, all across the Empire. Kralthos felt a cold sensation in the pit of his stomach. Explain. Ships, sir. Thousands of them. They just appeared, all at once, around every military installation, every orbital station, every fleet base. They weren't there, and then they were. The commander's image flickered as his transmission was interrupted by alarm sounds in the background. What kind of ships? Kralthos demanded. Unknown design, unknown technology. They're not responding to communications, but they're not attacking either. They're just, waiting. Hyun-woo remained standing in his place, his expression unchanged. But So Young had opened her briefcase and was calmly assembling what looked like communication equipment. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who had practiced the assembly procedure thousands of times. Around the council chamber, other delegates were beginning to receive their own emergency communications. The Zelthron delegation buzzed, frantically with electronic signals. The Hithrak clicked their mandibles in agitation. Even the usually calm Nethrian representatives seemed disturbed by whatever they were hearing. So Young finished assembling her equipment and activated it. The holographic display that appeared was larger and clearer than anything that had been seen in the chamber so far. It showed a view of space that made several delegates gasp in shock. Hundreds of ships hung in perfect formation around a Vorthak orbital fortress. The ships were sleek and dark, their surfaces seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with a precision that suggested either incredible skill or artificial intelligence that was far beyond anything most galactic species possessed. "This is Captain Gite of the human vessel Soul's Hammer," a voice said from the display. The captain appeared to be standing on a bridge that was unlike anything the council members had ever seen. Every surface seemed to flow with information, and the crew moved with the coordinated efficiency of a single organism. I am broadcasting on all frequencies to Vorthak military installations throughout the Empire, Gite continued. His voice was calm and professional, but it carried an undertone of absolute authority. Human forces have taken position around all Vorthak military assets. We are not here to attack. We are here to collect our people. Kralthos tried to interrupt his own communication channel, but found that he could not. Somehow, the human transmission was overriding all Vorthak military communications. All Vorthak vessels will power down weapons and prepare for inspection, Gite announced. Any ship that refuses to comply will be disabled. Any ship that attempts to flee will be disabled. Any ship that attempts to fight will be disabled. The camera view changed to show the interior of a Vorthak command center. Vorthak officers stood frozen at their control stations, staring at displays that showed impossible readings. Their weapons, systems were offline. Their shield generators were not responding. Their engines were producing power, but the power was not reaching any of their systems. How? One of the Vorthak officers whispered. How are they doing this? Another view appeared, showing a different Vorthak installation. This one was a ground-based facility, surrounded by defensive walls and protected by energy shields that could withstand orbital bombardment. But the shields were down, and human soldiers were walking through the facility as if the defenses did not exist. The human soldiers moved like nothing the council members had ever seen. They flowed through the Vorthak base like water, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously, coordinating their actions with inhuman precision. They were not running or fighting. They were simply there, everywhere at once, and the Vorthak defenders could do nothing to stop them. Colonel Yu Jin, reporting from Vorthak Labor Facility 7, one of the soldiers said into her communication device. Her voice was crisp and professional, but underneath it was something that sounded like barely controlled rage. We have located 437 human civilians. Extraction in progress. The display showed human colonists being led out of detention facilities by human soldiers. The colonists looked confused and frightened, but they were alive. Children ran to their parents. Families that had been separated were reunited. Medical personnel moved among them, checking for injuries and providing immediate care. All Vorthak personnel at this facility have been secured, Eugene continued. No casualties among enemy forces. Repeat, no casualties among enemy forces. We are following Protocol 8 engagement rules. Kralthos finally managed to override the human transmission long enough to shout into his communication device. Fight! Back! Destroy the human ships! Activate planetary defenses! But the Vorthak commander on his screen shook his head helplessly. We can't, sir. Nothing is responding. It's like they turned off our entire military. A new voice entered the communication channel. It was calm and cultured, with the slight accent that marked it as coming from one of the human core worlds. General Kralthos, this is Donghyun Park, Human Intelligence Service. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if it was being broadcast through every communication device in Vorthak space simultaneously. I believe we may have met at the trade negotiations on Nexus Station last year. You complimented our efficiency with commercial documentation. Kralthos remembered the human, a quiet, mild-mannered trade representative who had helped resolve a dispute over shipping routes. He had seemed completely harmless. Your planetary defense systems have been under our control for approximately 6 months. Dong-hyun continued conversationally. Your military communication networks have been compromised for 8 months. Your fleet coordination systems have been accessible to us for over a year. The camera view switched again, this time showing the bridge of a massive Vorthak battleship. The crew sat motionless at their stations, not because they were dead or injured, but because their control systems were no longer responding to their commands. The ship was intact, the crew was unharmed, but the vessel was completely helpless. We have been monitoring your military capabilities since the first day you claimed human territory, Dong-hyun explained. We know the location of every Vorthak ship, the status of every Vorthak installation, and the identity of every Vorthak officer above the rank of squad leader. Around the council chamber, delegates were receiving more and more emergency communications from their home territories. The scope of human military action was becoming clear, and it was larger than anyone had imagined possible. The humans had not just appeared around Vorthak installations. They had taken positions throughout the galaxy, around the military assets of every major power. They were not attacking, but they were demonstrating that they could attack whenever they chose to do so. Every human civilian will be returned to human territory within 12 hours, Gite announced from his command bridge. Every Vorthak military unit will remain in position until the extraction is complete. Any attempt to interfere with our operations will result in the immediate disabling of all Vorthak military assets. The transmission paused, and in that pause, the true scope of what was happening became clear to everyone in the council chamber. The humans had been watching. They had been planning. They had been preparing for exactly this situation while smiling politely and serving tea at diplomatic receptions. They had been pretending to be harmless while building a military capability that could neutralize the entire Vorthak Empire in a matter of hours. This concludes our demonstration, Gite said quietly. We hope it has been educational. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Hyun-woo was still standing in his place, his hands still folded respectfully in front of him. He looked exactly the same as he had when the session began. But now, everyone in the chamber understood that they had never really seen him at all. They had been looking at a mask, a carefully constructed diplomatic persona that hid something much more dangerous underneath. Does the Vorthak delegation wish to reconsider their territorial claims? Hyun-woo asked politely. His voice was still calm and respectful, but his eyes were no longer those of a diplomat. They were the eyes of a predator. For the first time in his long military career, General Kralthos felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. The holographic displays showing disabled Vorthak fleets and helpless military installations painted a picture that his mind struggled to accept. The Vorthak Empire, which had dominated this region of space for over 1,000 years, had been neutralized in a matter of hours by a species they had dismissed as harmless bureaucrats. But Kralthos had not risen to command the Vorthak military by accepting defeat easily. His 4 hands curled into fists as he fought against the terror that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. This changes nothing, he declared, his voice echoing through the council chamber. The Vorthak Empire does not negotiate with terrorists and kidnappers. If the humans want their people back, they will surrender unconditionally and accept Vorthak judgment. Several delegates turned to stare at him in disbelief. The humans had just demonstrated the ability to disable every Vorthak military asset. Simultaneously, and he was still making threats. Hyun-woo's expression remained perfectly calm. We are not terrorists, honored Kralthos. We are simply parents who want our children returned safely to their homes. Your children, are now property of the Vorthak Empire, Kralthos snarled. They will remain in our custody until they have worked off the cost of their relocation and education in proper galactic citizenship. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Even the other Vorthak delegates looked uncomfortable with their general's continued defiance in the face of overwhelming evidence of human military superiority. Furthermore, Kralthos continued, apparently mistaking the silence for weakness, if the humans do not withdraw their ships immediately, the Vorthak Empire will activate its planetary bombardment systems. Your precious colonies will be reduced to radioactive ash. It was the kind of threat that had worked for centuries. Most species would panic at the thought of their civilian populations being targeted by Vorthak planet killers. Most species would beg for mercy and accept whatever terms the Empire offered. But humans were not most species. A new figure stood up in the human delegation section. She had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings, so inconspicuous that most delegates had not even noticed her presence. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with the kind of plain appearance that made her easy to overlook in a crowd. She had been introduced earlier as Subin Lee, a cultural exchange student who was observing the proceedings as part of her graduate studies in interspecies relations. "Excuse me?" she said politely, her voice barely loud enough to be heard over the murmur of conversation in the chamber. "I believe there may be some confusion about Vorthak planetary bombardment capabilities." Kralthos turned his burning yellow eyes toward her. What could a human child possibly know about Vorthak military systems? Subin reached up and carefully removed the contact lenses she had been wearing. The eyes revealed underneath were nothing like the soft brown that had been visible before. They were pale gray, almost colorless, and they held the kind of cold intelligence that made experienced soldiers feel uncomfortable. "I know that your bombardment systems were disabled approximately 3 minutes and 47 seconds ago," she said, her voice still quiet but carrying clearly through the chamber. "I know that your planetary defense grid has been under human control for the past 6 months. I know that your homeworld communications array is currently broadcasting our messages instead of yours." She stood up fully, and somehow her plain student appearance seemed to shift and change. The awkward posture of a nervous graduate student was replaced by the fluid movement of someone who had been trained to kill with her bare hands. "I also know," she continued, "that your personal bodyguards are carrying weapons that will not function, wearing armor that will not protect them, and breathing air that contains trace amounts of compounds that will make them very sleepy in approximately 4 minutes. Kralthos looked around at his bodyguards. They were elite Vorthak warriors, chosen for their loyalty and their skill in combat. But as he watched, their movements were becoming sluggish. Their eyes were having trouble focusing. One of them swayed slightly on his feet. "What did you do?" Kralthos demanded. "Nothing dramatic," Subin replied. "Just a small adjustment to the air recycling system in the Vorthak section of the station. Your people will fall asleep for a few hours. When they wake up, they will feel perfectly fine. We are not interested in harming anyone unnecessarily." The Vorthak bodyguards were struggling to stay upright now. Their weapons clattered to the floor as their fingers lost the strength to hold them. Within seconds, all 6 of them had collapsed into peaceful unconsciousness. Around the chamber, delegates from other species were checking their own breathing, equipment, and looking nervously at the humans in their midst. "Who are you?" Kralthos whispered. Subin's smile was nothing like the friendly expressions that humans usually wore in diplomatic settings. It was the smile of an apex predator that had been playing with its food. My name is Major Subin Lee, Human Special Forces Intelligence Division, she said. I have been studying Vorthak culture and military systems for the past 3 years. I have lived on Vorthak worlds, worked in Vorthak facilities, and socialized with Vorthak officers. They all thought I was a harmless human graduate student. She walked toward Kraltos with movements that were smooth and controlled. Every step was perfectly placed, every gesture calculated for maximum psychological impact. During that time, I have mapped every Vorthak military installation, identified every key personnel, and planted monitoring devices in every command center. I have had access to your most classified information for over 2 years. Kraltos tried to activate his personal weapon, but his claws could not find the activation switch. The device remained inert in his hands. Your bombardment systems, Subin continued, were designed by the Catherian Collective 40 years ago. The control codes are hardwired into the targeting computers. We purchased those codes from the Catherian government last month for the equivalent of 12 million human credits. The Catherian delegate in the chamber made a sound that might have been embarrassment or surprise. The idea that their government had sold military secrets to the humans was apparently news to their own representative. Your planetary defense grid uses communication protocols that were standard galactic technology 15 years ago. We have been monitoring every transmission for the past 8 months. Your own defense system has been sending us detailed reports on its status and capabilities. Subin was close enough to Kraltos now that she could have reached out and touched him, but she did not need to. Her words were more effective than any physical weapon. Your homeworld communications array was upgraded with human-designed components 6 months ago. The work was done by a human engineering firm that specializes in improving galactic communication systems. Every message sent through that array has been copied to human intelligence servers. The implications of what she was saying began to sink in throughout the chamber. The humans had not just been polite observers during their 30 years in galactic society. They had been systematically infiltrating every major power, learning their secrets, and preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. But most importantly, Subin said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber, your threat to bombard human colonies cannot be carried out because those bombardment systems are no longer under your control. She activated a small device on her wrist, and new holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber. They showed Vorthak planetary bombardment stations, massive installations capable of sterilizing entire worlds. But the installations were dark, their crews evacuated, their weapons systems completely shut down. Every Vorthak planet killer in. The Empire has been offline for the past 17 minutes, Subin announced. The shutdown was coordinated and simultaneous. Your technicians are currently discovering that their access codes no longer work, and their manual overrides have been disabled. Kraltos stared at the displays in horror. The planetary bombardment systems were the ultimate guarantee of Vorthak military supremacy. No species had ever dared to challenge the Empire while those weapons remained operational. But the weapons were gone. Not destroyed, but simply turned off, as if someone had flipped a switch and decided that the Vorthak Empire was no longer allowed to threaten entire worlds. This is impossible, Kraltos whispered. No one has that kind of access to our systems. No one could coordinate an operation of this scope. Subin's smile grew wider. You are correct. No one species could coordinate an operation of this scope. But humans are not acting alone. New figures appeared in the holographic displays. They were not human, but they were not any species that the council members recognized either. They moved with the same coordinated precision as the human forces, but their technology was different, more advanced. For the past 15 years, Subin explained, humanity has been in contact with several species that prefer to remain outside galactic politics, species that have been watching the behavior of the major powers with growing concern. The council chamber had never been so quiet. Even the constant hum of life support systems seemed muted as hundreds of alien delegates tried to process what they had just witnessed. The Vorthak Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful forces in the galaxy, had surrendered without firing a single shot. Kralthos sat slumped in his chair, his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides. The fight had gone out of him completely when he realized that resistance was not just futile, but impossible. His empire's most closely guarded military secrets had been compromised for months. Their ultimate weapons had been turned off like children's toys. Even his personal bodyguards had been neutralized by a human graduate student who turned out to be a special forces operative. The Vorthak Empire accepts the human terms, he said quietly. His voice carried none of its former arrogance. Our forces will withdraw from the disputed territories. All human colonists will be returned immediately. Reparations will be paid in accordance with galactic law. A collective sigh seemed to go through the chamber as the immediate crisis passed. But the relief was short-lived as the deeper implications of what had happened began to sink in. Counselor Thexinar of the Catherian Collective was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. The Catherian were known for their analytical minds and their ability to see patterns that other species missed. When Thexinar spoke, other delegates usually listened carefully. Human delegation, Thexinar said, his synthetic voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I believe I speak for many council members when I ask, what else have you been hiding? It was the question that had been lurking in everyone's mind since Admiral Wanbin's first transmission. If humans had concealed their true military capabilities for 30 years, what other secrets were they keeping? Hyunwoo exchanged glances with his team members. For a moment, the diplomatic mask slipped completely, and the delegates could see him making a decision that would change galactic politics forever. That is a reasonable question, honored Thexinar, Hyunwoo said. Perhaps it is time for complete transparency. He nodded to Byung-ho, who had been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the proceedings. Byung-ho had been introduced as a junior researcher, someone who helped with background information and technical details. Like so many other humans in the chamber, he was not what he appeared to be. Byung-ho stood up and activated equipment that was far more sophisticated than anything that belonged in the hands of a research assistant. The holographic display that appeared was larger and more detailed than any that had been seen in the chamber so far. For the past 30 years, Byung-ho began, humanity has been conducting what we call the Galactic Assessment Project. Every interaction with alien species has also been a data collection operation. The display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with thousands of data points marked in different colors. Each point represented a different piece of information that human intelligence services had gathered over the decades. We have complete tactical analyses of every major species' military capabilities, Byung-ho continued. His voice was calm and professional, but the information he was presenting was terrifying in its scope. We know the locations of all military installations, the specifications of all ship designs, and the details of all strategic planning. The map zoomed in to show specific sectors, revealing the depth of human knowledge. They had mapped every trade route, cataloged every resource deposit, and identified every potential point of conflict in the galaxy. We have detailed economics analysis showing the financial vulnerabilities of every major power, Byung-ho said. We know which species depend on specific trade relationships, which economies would collapse if certain supply lines were disrupted, and which governments would fall if particular economic pressures were applied. Delegate after delegate was checking their personal communication devices, receiving confirmation that human intelligence was even more extensive than Byung-ho was describing. Trade agreements that species thought were secret had been known to humans for years. Military plans that were classified at the highest levels had been copied to human databases before the ink was dry. We have comprehensive social and political analyses of every species represented in this chamber. Byung-ho continued. We understand your cultural pressure points, your historical grievances, and your internal political dynamics. We have been modeling potential conflicts and preparing response scenarios for every possible combination of events. Mirai, the quiet communications officer, stood up and activated her own equipment. The displays that appeared showed something even more unsettling than military or economic intelligence. We have been monitoring all galactic communications for the past 23 years, she announced. Every diplomatic message, every military communication, every commercial transaction that used standard galactic networks has been copied to human analysis centers. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. If humans had access to all galactic communications, they knew about every secret negotiation, every private agreement, and every hidden alliance that had been formed over the past 2 decades. We know about the Zelthron military research projects. That officially do not exist, Mirai said, her voice carrying clearly through the electronic buzzing that came from the Zelthron delegation. We know about the Hithrak territorial expansion plans that were supposed to remain classified for another 50 years. We know about the secret economic agreements between the Nethrian Republic and the Outer Rim cartels. Species after species received confirmation that their most closely guarded secrets were known to human intelligence services. The humans had not just been observing galactic politics from the outside. They had been reading everyone's private mail for over 2 decades. But perhaps most importantly, said Jin-ho, standing up from where he had been sitting with the cultural exchange personnel, we have been preparing for every possible conflict scenario. We have detailed response plans for every combination of species that might form hostile alliances against human interests. The display changed to show military deployment scenarios. Hundreds of different potential conflicts were mapped out, with human response strategies for each one. The level of detail was staggering. They had not just planned for wars against individual species, but for complex multi-sided conflicts involving dozens of different powers. We have contingency plans for economic warfare, cyber warfare, conventional military action, and several forms of conflict that most species have never encountered, Jin-ho continued. We have been preparing for these scenarios while attending your cultural festivals and participating in your trade negotiations. The chamber was completely silent now. The scope of human preparation for galactic conflict was beyond what anyone had imagined possible. They had not just been hiding their military capabilities, they had been systematically preparing to fight and win wars against any possible combination of enemies. But the most unsettling revelation was still to come. Every human diplomatic interaction has been simultaneously a reconnaissance mission and a test of alien intentions, Hyun-woo said. When we served tea at diplomatic receptions, we were analyzing the chemical composition of your saliva for intelligence purposes. When we participated in cultural exchanges, we were mapping your social structures for potential exploitation. When we helped resolve trade disputes, we were gaining access to your economic data. He paused, letting the weight of this information settle into the minds of his audience. "We were not pretending to be friendly," he continued. "We genuinely wanted to build positive relationships with other species, but we were also preparing for the possibility that those relationships might fail." Counselor Vexitar leaned forward in his chair. His voice was carefully controlled, but underneath it was a note of something that might have been fear. "Are you saying that every human in the galactic community has been a spy?" Hyunwoo considered the question carefully. "Not a spy in the traditional sense, but every human who has interacted with alien species has been trained to observe, analyze, and report on what they see. Our scientists, our traders, our cultural attachés, our students, all of them have been contributing to our understanding of galactic civilization." The revelation was staggering. For 30 years, other species had welcomed humans into their societies, shared their cultures, and built relationships with them. But all of that time, the humans had been studying them like specimens in a laboratory. "We told ourselves it was necessary for our survival," Hyunwoo continued. "We were a young species entering a galaxy full of older, more powerful civilizations. We needed to understand who we were dealing with." He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of different species. "But the truth is simpler than that. We are predators. We evolved on a world where the price of not understanding your environment was death. When we encountered galactic civilization, we did what our species has always done. We studied everything around us until we understood how to survive." The word predators seemed to hang in the air like a physical presence. It recontextualized everything that other species thought they knew about. 2 months had passed since what historians would later call the Day of Human Revelation. The galactic community was still adjusting to the new reality that had been unveiled in the council chamber that day. The 3 disputed human colonies had been returned exactly as promised. Every human colonist had been freed from Vorthak labor facilities and transported safely back to their homes. Families that had been separated were reunited. Children who had been taken from their parents were returned unharmed. The Vorthak Empire had paid full reparations and issued a formal apology that was broadcast throughout their territory. But the real change was not in the resolution of a single territorial dispute. The real change was in how every species in the galaxy now looked at humanity. Hyejin Kim stood at the podium in the Great Council chamber, looking out at the same assembly of alien delegates who had witnessed her people's transformation from harmless diplomats to apex predators. She had been one of the colonists taken from New Seoul, separated from her family, and forced to work in Vorthak mining operations. Now she was here to address the Galactic Council about what she had learned during her captivity. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber that had once echoed with Vorthak threats and human ultimatums. "I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak about the resilience of the human spirit." She looked directly at the Vorthak section, where a much smaller delegation now sat. Kralthos was not among them. He had been recalled to the Vorthak homeworld to face questions about how he had managed to provoke a species that could disable an entire galactic empire without firing a shot. "During my time in Vorthak custody," Hyejin continued, "I had many opportunities to observe the differences between human and alien approaches to adversity. My captors seemed to believe that humans would break under the pressure of forced labor and family separation." She paused, and her expression grew thoughtful. "But they did not understand that humans are not fragile creatures who need protection from hardship. We are the species that survived ice ages, volcanic winters, and global plagues on our homeworld. We are the species that turned a death world into a garden through sheer stubborn determination. Around the chamber, delegates listened with the kind of attention that came from new respect mixed with wariness. Everyone now understood that underestimating humanity was a potentially fatal mistake. The Vorthak guards expected us to despair when we were separated from our families, Heejin said. Instead, we organized ourselves into support networks. They expected us to fight each other for better treatment. Instead, we shared resources and protected the weakest among us. They expected us to break under physical labor. Instead, we turned their own mining equipment into communication devices and coordination tools. She activated a small holographic display that showed images from the labor facilities. But these were not the scenes of suffering that the Vorthak had broadcast earlier. These showed human colonists working together with quiet efficiency, turning oppression into opportunity. Within 3 weeks, we had established underground schools for the children. Within 6 weeks, we had built a primitive but functional medical facility using salvaged materials. Within 8 weeks, we had developed escape plans for every facility and contingency strategies for dozens of different scenarios. The images showed human ingenuity at work. Mining tools had been converted into communication devices. Food distribution systems had been reorganized to ensure that children and elderly colonists received proper nutrition. Work schedules had been secretly modified to allow time for education and planning. What our captors failed to understand, Heejin continued, is that adversity does not weaken humans. It reveals what we are truly capable of when we stop being polite and start being practical. Counselor Vextar shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The implications of what Heejin was describing were unsettling. If humans could organize themselves so effectively under the worst possible conditions, what could they accomplish when they were free to act openly? But the most important thing I learned during those months, Heejin said, is that humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our military capabilities. Our greatest strength is our refusal to abandon each other. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of different species. Every human in those facilities knew that our people would come for us. Not because we had faith in our government or our military, but because we understand something fundamental about human nature. We do not leave our family behind. Ever. The E. Word family carried a weight that was difficult for many alien species to understand. Most galactic civilizations had complex social hierarchies based on merit, genetics, or social class. But humans applied the concept of family to their entire species, creating bonds of loyalty that transcended individual interests. When Kralthos threatened to bombard human colonies, Heejin continued, he made the mistake of thinking that humans calculate costs and benefits the same way other species do. He thought we would weigh the lives of 3 million colonists against the risk of galactic war and choose the path that minimized casualties. She paused, and her expression grew serious. But humans do not think that way. When our children are threatened, we do not calculate acceptable losses. We calculate how to eliminate the threat completely, regardless of the cost to ourselves. Around the chamber, military advisors were making notes and sending messages to their home governments. The strategic implications of humanity's approach to warfare were still being analyzed by every major power in the galaxy. This is why the demonstration you witnessed 2 months ago was so effective, Heejin explained. It was not just a display of human military technology, it was a display of human commitment to protecting our own. Every species in the galaxy now understands that threatening human civilians will result in a response that is swift, overwhelming, and absolutely merciless. The chamber fell quiet as delegates considered the long-term implications of this new reality. For centuries, galactic politics had been based on calculated aggression and acceptable losses. Species would threaten each other's civilian populations as a negotiating tactic, knowing that rational governments would eventually compromise rather than risk total war. But humans were apparently not rational in the way that other species understood the term. They were willing to risk everything to protect their people, and they had the capability to make that risk meaningful. However, Hyjin said, her tone becoming more conciliatory, I also want the Council to understand that humans do not seek conflict. We prefer cooperation, mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. The military capabilities you witnessed are defensive in nature. They exist to protect human interests, not to threaten alien ones. She activated another holographic display. This one showing human colonies and space stations throughout the galaxy. But instead of military installations, the images showed research facilities, manufacturing centers, and cultural exchange programs. Since the resolution of the territorial dispute, human contributions to galactic civilization have actually increased, Hyjin reported. Our medical research programs have expanded to include collaborative projects with 17 different species. Our engineering firms are working on infrastructure improvements for 12 different star systems. Our cultural exchange programs now include over 40 different alien civilizations. The irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. The revelation of humanity's true capabilities had not led to isolation or fear-based policies. Instead, it had led to increased cooperation and deeper integration with galactic society. The difference, Hyjin explained, is that these collaborations are now based on mutual respect, rather than the assumption that humans are harmless and easily manipulated. When other species understand that we are capable of defending ourselves, they are more likely to treat us as genuine partners rather than convenient tools. Ambassador Hyun-woo stood up from his seat in the human delegation. He looked exactly the same as he had during the crisis 2 months earlier. The same perfectly pressed uniform, the same polite expression, the same respectful posture. But now, everyone in the chamber could see the steel underneath the diplomatic courtesy. The human delegation wishes to make one final statement to the Council, he said. We want to be absolutely clear about our intentions going forward. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. Humanity's preferred mode of interaction with galactic civilization is exactly what you experienced for our first 30 years as council members. We want to be helpful. We want to be cooperative. We want to contribute to the greater good of all species. His diplomatic smile appeared, but now everyone knew what it really meant. We want to be polite. The word carried a weight that it had never held before. Everyone in the chamber now understood that human politeness was not weakness or naivety. It was a conscious choice made by a species that was fully capable of being something much more dangerous. But politeness, Hyun-woo continued, requires reciprocity. It requires that other species treat humans with the same respect that we show them. It requires that our people and our territories are not threatened or